wherever you go and discuss artificial intelligence, there are a few names that will come up again and again in the discussions. And the first one is our first keynote speaker here today. He is associate professor at Northwestern University in Illinois in USA. And this academic year, he has actually spent much of his time as visiting research fellow at the University of Amsterdam. And I must say that the guy you're about to meet, yes, he is an academic, but I think I have not met an academic that is so truly plugged into the reality of media. He's going to dive into the state of AI in media, use cases, possibilities, restraint. Please give a warm welcome to Nick Diakopoulos.
Thanks so much. Thank you so much for the introduction, and really thanks to the organizers for creating a space for discussion around these very important topics here today. So, yeah, I'm Nick Diakopoulos, a professor of communication and computer science at Northwestern University. I also have a Scandinavian connection, so I'm also an associate professor too at the University of Bergen in Norway. So I've actually been coming to Norway for about 14 years back and forth. So I was asked by the organizers to cover a little bit of this topic of the state of AI in media. And so I'm going to start off by being a little descriptive, and then I'll get into some of my interpretations of what I think is going on and maybe a little bit of what needs to happen in the media environment moving forward. So some of you might be familiar with my book, Automating the News. This was published in 2019, which seems like just a lifetime ago. In the book, I explore how AI and algorithms and automation are used across a range of different use cases. So data mining, automated content production, distribution, and so on. And really, I have to say, in the years since then, I think there's been a lot of continuity. We sort of continue to see examples of AI's use proliferating in industry and the news media across these various application areas. And so I'm just going to cover a few more recent examples that have come across my feed. So here's one that I actually worked on. It's an example of news discovery using data mining of the US voter file. So that's the data of everyone who votes in the United States, where we automatically generated tip sheets for journalists in order to help them find stories for the 2020 US elections. And this was implemented at the Washington Post when I was there in 2019. So the idea is to just give journalists that first idea, the first inkling of a possible story, and give them an idea or a direction that they can pursue in their reporting. And in this case, you can see it kind of pulls out geographic areas, and it's kind of trying to identify different demographic trends in the electorate. And we're using data mining and then natural language generation to generate the different newsworthy points and kind of get people's interest. And this was actually used in 2020. So the Washington Post was able to have some of their video reporters use the tool to direct them to particular counties that they then went out and reported in. Also on the topic of automated content generation, an example like the Gannett Localizer project has been used to automatically generate content that is localized across all their local newsrooms. And they're looking at other kind of topics, weather, unemployment, COVID, real estate. These kinds of use cases have been popping up over the last few years in other newsrooms as well. Now, just to add to this, based on some of our research in my lab at Northwestern, I can tell you that use cases like this are actually really compelling because they do actually improve the article relevance for end users. We've run those studies. And so there's value in terms of generating user engagement through these kinds of deployments of technology. And then there's the proliferation of something like A/B headline testing. This leverages a form of AI called reinforcement learning to determine which version of a headline is optimal for your audience in terms of generating traffic. We also ran a study on this in this domain using data from Chartbeat, starting with data from more than 1,000 publishers that use Chartbeat for A/B headline testing. And we found that the median winning headline had a 23% higher click-through rate in comparison to the average click-through rate for a test. So this stuff actually works, right? It has value for news organizations. Now, in 2022, the New York Times reached a milestone, 10 million subscribers, 10 million paying subscribers. And that is, to some extent, owing to their use of a paywall, which they launched actually in 2011, where they try to convert casual readers into registered users into paying subscribers. And of course, they're using machine learning now to help optimize this process. They call this the dynamic meter, and it basically optimizes how much free content you get to see before they serve you a subscription offer to try to get you converted to being a paying subscriber. Of course, this is all driven by machine learning. You can read about it in their blog post. They're very nice about being open at the New York Times. And I also want to add here that, interestingly, we've kind of seen an indication that some organizations are taking an interest in practicing responsible machine learning, so, or at least telegraphing that they're interested in those things. In this case, indicating that they're not going to use demographic or psychographic information in order to convert subscribers or convert users to subscribers. So that's also, I think, an indication of where the industry is at, is starting to think about responsibility. So for a while, I think certainly the past couple of years, it seemed to me at least like we were coming out of that classic hype curve, right? Where we have an innovation, it peaks up, we have inflated expectations, people kind of get disillusioned when it doesn't work exactly how they were hoping. But then we kind of get into this slope of enlightenment, and eventually we hit a plateau of productivity where we figure out how it's actually useful. So I kind of thought we were coming out of this hype curve, we were kind of getting to that slope of enlightenment. Technologies like natural language generation, recommender systems, other machine learning approaches like A/B testing, we were seeing that there was actual value, both editorial value for finding stories and communicating stories, but also for news businesses in terms of optimizing traffic and generating revenue. So these applications of AI to tasks like A/B testing, automated content generation, transcription, translation, optimized paywalls, these technologies are really kind of starting to fade into the background. I think they're kind of getting less and less brag-worthy, right? AI is sort of becoming pervasive, it's inconspicuous, it's disappearing into almost everything that we do in the media. So, one perspective on news media is that it's all about information processing. And, information processing nowadays really has AI in every aspect of it. So I think it's going to be hard to avoid AI in the future of media as well. Eventually, I think it's going to be everywhere. It's going to be just like the phone in your pocket, and you're probably going to forget it's there. Now, that may not be a good thing that you forget that AI is running the media system, and probably we need more time than I have in my speech today to talk about that. But I do kind of see this as a general trend from where we are starting right now. Okay, and then, and you might have sensed this was coming, then there's generative AI, and we're back to the peak of the hype cycle, right? Inflated expectations, fears about potential harms, including crazy animations and things that will, make your, yeah, there you go. You got to have the animation, just the silly kind of get your attention, right? So, of course, it's not all about ChatGPT, right? That's the one that everyone talks about. Generative AI, we used to call them deepfakes. They've made for fancy demos now for at least a few years in the media. So recently, a synthetic anchor reading the news at Kuwait News, or also a year ago in South Korea, demonstrating, leading to kind of an awkward interaction where the South Korean news anchor is confronting her synthetic self during an interview. So it's all a little bit sensational, but we've been doing this for a couple of years now. And of course, it's not just about news organizations, right? It's also big tech that's using generative AI in ways that are going to impact the broader media ecosystem. And I think so you're seeing here an example from Microsoft's Bing search interface, where you can enter a query and it will synthesize a response to you. But I think it's also really important to be thinking about the limitations of the technology, right? We've heard about how generative AI can hallucinate, has accuracy issues. It also has issues in terms of attributing information and sourcing information accurately. And I actually did a really quick small audit of Bing's results when it first came out. I punched in different news-related queries, and I found that there were accuracy issues in about half of the responses that I got, including things like false source attribution or just false factual information. And so, and actually this trend that I found in this blog post that you can check out has since been substantiated by more rigorous research and extensive audits. And I know we're focused on news here, but I think generative AI is also going to have impacts on the broader information ecology, right? Including advertising. So here's an example of what a creative editor can do with generative video and audio in a few hours.
Are you ready for best pizza of life? Bring friends down to Pepperoni Hug Spot. Our chefs make pizza with heart and special touch. Cheese, pepperoni, vegetable, and more secret things. Need delivery? Pizzas come fast. Knock, knock, who's there? Pizza magic. Eat Pepperoni Hug Spot pizza. Your tummy say thank you. Your mouth say, Pepperoni Hug Spot. It's like family, but with more cheese.
So I always get a little chuckle out, when I watch this. There's a little bit of an uncanny valley thing going on, right? It's not quite there yet. It's the people gobbling at pieces of pizza that look kind of like they're almost zombies in a way. I think the important thing I want to emphasize here is that it's not quite there yet. You still need smart, creative people editing these things together, figuring out the right prompts to generate this material. But it's a direction that I think we're kind of heading in based on the current state of the media, current state of the art in generative AI. And of course, it's not just commercial advertising either, right? There's also political ads, which I'll show you this one, which uses generative imagery to kind of create a dystopian vision around Biden if he's reelected.
This just in, we can now call the 2024 presidential race for Joe Biden.
My fellow Americans.
This morning, an emboldened China invades Taiwan.
Financial markets are in free fall as 500 regional banks have shuttered their doors. Border agents were overrun by a surge of 80,000 illegals yesterday evening.
Officials closed the city of San Francisco this morning, citing the escalating crime and fentanyl crisis.
Who's in charge here? It feels like the train is coming off the tracks.
So this is what we're stepping into with generative AI, right? It's going to be used in advertising. It's going to be used to create fear in politics as well. And that's to say nothing of the ways in which this is going to be used to create disinformation. It's already being used to create disinformation or to create content mills that churn out low-quality news-like content that confuses and misleads individuals. So, all of this generated media is also creating a new dimension of misinformation that media needs to deal with. So, looking at the misinformation beat, the fact-checking beat. Journalists are already stretched to cover all of the misinformation that they need to cover, and this is just going to essentially proliferate that. We'll have to look and see how audience behavior reacts to this. I can imagine one version of this where people realizing that the social media is flooded with low quality content that they can't trust, maybe they're driven more towards trusted brands that convey a sense of responsibility and a trustworthiness to the content that they provide. And there's more coming down the pipeline too. So once you have lots of imagery of a scene, like you might have with a drone flying over the scene or even just taking a camera and running it around the scene, you can now render that content from different viewpoints using a neural radiance field. This is basically generative AI that can re-render pixels from different viewpoints. Obviously this has a potential to shape news media and create new opportunities for engagement and experience. So I'll just show you what this looks like. You've all seen car commercials, right? You know, where they're kind of rotating around the car. But this is based on just a series of iPhone images that the creator took. And as it zooms out, you can see how they've kind of created a 3D environment here you can fly in and interact with and interact with and move around. And this is all using the same underlying technology that creates other forms of generative AI. So I think the sort of the bigger message here is that there's going to be implications for the media system beyond just news media, right? But the news media needs to be aware of how it's changing the whole media ecology. And you know, this is a general purpose technology. It's going to create outputs in text, video, audio, 3D models, radiance fields, and so on. And so it really kind of has the potential to touch everything in the media system. So as we look out at the possibilities that are kind of currently getting hyped, like generative AI in search, in advertising, and misinformation, I think really what we need to do, maybe the antidote, is to have a more level-headed approach to thinking through the specific capabilities of generative AI and how those specific capabilities relate to particular newsroom tasks. And I think what we need to do is very quickly move into the next stage of the hype curve, where we're trying to figure out and see where these technologies are actually useful, where they actually have value to media. And with that in mind, I thought it was kind of important to launch this initiative called the Generative AI in the Newsroom Project to kind of kick the tires on the technology. As a kind of response to the hype, to be able to help calibrate expectations to what these newer technologies can actually offer, and also what they can't offer. And so the idea is to really collaboratively figure out responsible use, try to sort the hype from the reality of what these generative AI models can do, and explore different use cases. So working with folks on different use cases related to news discovery, summarization, personalization, data journalism, SEO, illustration, and on and on. People are very creative with different ways that this technology can be used. You can check out some of those use cases on generative-ai-newsroom.com, read up on the use cases. You can also see we cover other aspects of this. For instance, like the implications of copyright law for generative AI. And I should also add, I know there's a lot of folks in this room who are probably also experimenting with the technology. If you're interested in sharing your experiences, your own explorations with the technology, please feel free to get in touch or pitch an idea for the blog. So that said, let's step back a little bit and get some perspective on how we got here. So we've got us here in 2023, right, with the generative AI hype. And I've mentioned that there's sort of been ongoing activity in the last few years related to AI in news production, as where we're kind of starting to come out of that hype cycle, I think. And if we go back to actually one of the key examples from my book from 2019 was actually deployment of AI technology by the Associated Press in 2014 related to automated natural language generation for automated financial reporting. Almost a decade ago, right? And if we push further into the past, my timeline here is the Computation Plus Journalism Symposium from 2008, which was first hosted at Georgia Institute of Technology. And incidentally, it's going to be in Europe next month in Zurich. So if you want another news and computing event, you can check that out. But at that time, in 2008, things like data journalism were starting to get hyped, right? And we were starting to get into another early hype cycle around computing and data in news circles. So if that's not enough context for you, we can kind of teleport back to 1958, when IBM demonstrated its first prototype of a system that could summarize news article content. And so, as you can see, we've sort of been working on AI in the news for quite a while. And the hype seems to come and go in these kinds of waves. So how do we start to make sense of the fact that there's this ongoing AI hype, as well as these AI technologies that are moving more into routine use in media production? So one of the factors that I think contributes to hyped AI versus more inconspicuous AI, as I'm calling it, is the degree of automation that's achievable with the AI. So there's different levels of automation. There's a scale here that I've grabbed from a paper from about 20 years ago, ranging at the bottom from the computer doing nothing, completely manual task, all the way to the top with a computer acting entirely autonomously. And in the middle, you have levels of semi-automation, right? So the computer is in the loop, delegating some tasks to the system. So things like level 4, where the system would suggest an alternative, but then it's totally up to the person to decide what to do with that option. Or level 5 automation. The computer suggests an alternative with a little button that says, do you approve? And if the human clicks approve, then it moves forward. Or level 6, where it's actually going to make a suggestion, and it's actually going to take action on that suggestion unless the human says, no, don't do that within some window of time. So at the top end of the scale, you have automation which can substitute for human labor, and I would argue that that's generally favored by capital. And at the bottom of the scale, you have automation which complements human labor, and I would say that it is generally favored by labor. I would argue often also the labor component, lower levels of automation tend to be aligned with maintaining editorial standards as well. Now, I would contend that if it's the tasks that fall in this higher echelon of automation towards the top, those are the tasks that tend to fade into invisibility. Once we can fully delegate a task to an AI tool, we're going to forget about it, right? That's kind of the point, isn't it? If we can trust the system to do the task at a level of performance that meets our expectation for the task and professional standards and so on, then we can delegate that task to the machine and just let it go. Now, the hype cycle itself, I think, feeds on and is also fed on a sense of uncertainty related to the degree of automation that's possible with the technology. So capital really likes hype, because in that uncertainty, you can marshal resources. There's unclear benefits, there's competitive fears, and these are driving capital. At the same time, the hype is also reinforced by labor. Fears from labor, in particular, who would tend to prefer lower levels of automation in general because they want to maintain autonomy, they want to maintain a sense of control, and probably also not lose a sense of purpose or gainful employment. So to be sure, sometimes AI actually does advance up this automation scale, but we constantly need to reassess that for specific news tasks. You know, is some task really automatable? Are maybe parts of that task automatable? Maybe it's entirely unreasonable to try to automate this task, and we shouldn't try it at all. But I would say, in short, I think pervasive and invisible AI is the AI that's kind of graduated into these upper reaches of automation, and that's largely the technology that is reliable and trustworthy. Things that continue to get hyped, they're a little bit lower down on the scale. They tend to get brought up over and over again. I mentioned summarization, which IBM started in 1958. Those are tasks that are still getting hyped. Maybe they're not quite ready for automation, at least at the level of quality where we would expect them to be fully automated. But maybe they're on the cusp, and that's always the big question. And I think part of why we have so many people in the room today. So where is generative AI in terms of its ability to move up this automation hierarchy? Well, we can ask it. I asked it. I asked GPT-4. I prompted it for tasks involved in news production. And then I asked it to do a hierarchical task analysis and rate the automatability of the different tasks using generative AI while maintaining professional standards. So if you see green, which isn't showing up terribly well in the projector, but if you see green, that's going to be high levels of automation. What you'll see is there's not a lot of green. And where you do see green, it's stuff that's like a little bit boring, and it's probably not the hyped stuff that we've been hearing about. But the other trend I want to point out is that you also see a lot of yellow and orange colors here. So these are tasks where AI can definitely help. AI is in the loop. There's human in the loop. But you need the person there kind of supervising the AI. So something like, think about creating graphics or charts or infographics. Generative AI can definitely start by offering suggestions, but then you need an editor to kind of clarify and get it ready for publication. You'll also see some red in this chart. These are tasks that AI is really just not cut out for or helpful for at all right now. And of course, if we drill into any of these tasks, because task analysis is always hierarchical, you can always drill into it and get more detailed. If we were going to drill into this, I think there would be some subtasks that are more or less automatable as well. And also, I want to mention that if we were to drop the constraint of while maintaining professional standards, I think you might also see a little bit more green here, right? So there's tends to be a trade-off between quality and automatability. So if you lower your quality standard, maybe you can automate a little bit more. So you can see here a first tension in editorial work where we want to have high editorial standards, high quality standards, so we need to make sure we maintain that standard and use that standard for actual automatability. Now, you wouldn't necessarily want to trust GPT-4's ratings of this. I know I kind of use that as a proxy, but I think actually a good bit of work before us is actually figuring out which of these tasks are green versus yellow versus orange versus red. Which can actually be automated with this latest wave of technology, and which do we truly need to keep people in the loop. But I think it's a fair starting point for starting this conversation. Okay, so I think where I'm going with this is really what I think we need to be creating in the media right now are AI-driven tools where people are using the tools and are left in control of the overall task, but they're supported by AI, right? I mean, all that yellow and orange, that's all tasks that should have humans in the loop. So we've got to be designing the interfaces to support people in those tasks. And the key word here really is design, right? And with a little plug, actually, to a recent special issue in the Journal of Digital Journalism on the future of design in journalism, if you want to read more about that. I think newsrooms need to be thinking about designing the future of work and how to hybridize people and AI. Looking at how to bring human abilities, control, oversight together with the state-of-the-art of AI capabilities. And of course, as the frontier shifts in what can be fully automated as new technologies come out, tasks might need to be re-architected. So when the first electric motors were developed, it took years for factories to realize that they actually needed to totally re-architect the layout of their factories in order to best capture the value of an electric motor in terms of efficiency for improving their production process. And I think the same lesson is probably true here in news production, where in some cases we may need to entirely reimagine the production process for news information. This is going to need to be creative. It's going to need to be iterative. But we're going to need to think about how we can design interactive interfaces, specialized interfaces, so that people can retain control and autonomy, but have the best ability to tap into AI's capabilities. And the other thing I think newsrooms need to think about is how to design AI technologies that incorporate news values, right? So how do you make sure the outputs of these systems are trustworthy with respect to editorial needs, and so that ethical commitments to the profession are still met? Also, I think this could be important in terms of maintaining some independence in news media from big tech. So it's going to need to be creative, iterative. I think we'll need to build specialized interfaces, but I think there are some interesting opportunities for industrial R&D here. So just a couple more points I want to make before I wrap up. In this hybridization of work, I think there's some really crucial implications for labor that maybe we're not talking about enough yet in this domain. So more often than not, AI technologies actually create new types of work. You've got to update the systems, you've got to tweak them, you need to validate them, you generally need to maintain the systems. So if you think about fact-checking the outputs of a generative AI system to make sure there were no hallucinations and that's accurate, or in this case, selecting from different illustration options that the system has created, that's all new work that people have to do. Some of this is going to be routine work. It might be boring. Maybe it's not attractive to the same people who got into the profession of journalism to begin with. So this might not be a comfortable transition for editorial workers in thinking about how to reskill or upskill people in ways that maybe they're not ready to engage in. And another point I want to really emphasize here is, and we don't talk about this enough, is the role of management in getting us through this transition. So if we think about something like transcription AI, if I'm a reporter using transcription AI, let's say there's 3 scenarios. I can do twice the number of stories because I'm using the transcription to transcribe every interview, or I can have twice as many sources per story, so I can improve the quality of the reporting, improve the diversity maybe of the sourcing in my reporting. Or maybe I write the same number of stories, but then management says you're going to do some other task. So all of these different implications, all of these different options have different implications for the news organization and also for the type of value that the news organization reaps from the technology, and also implications for the individual workers and how it changes their experience of the work. So we've already seen some strikes in Hollywood from the Writers Guild of America. AI is kind of a main topic there, generative AI, where they kind of want to bring management to the table for negotiations. And I think, unionized journalists are going to be better off as well in that sense. So unionize now if you haven't already. And now might be the time to start a conversation with management to get them to the table to talk about this transition of AI into the newsroom, how it's going to augment and change work, and how to make sure it's managed in ways that are not unfavorable to labor. Okay, wrapping up. I think, getting past the hype cycle, we really need to start just kicking the tires on the technology and figure out what's really automatable and what's not. So let's get out there, let's evaluate this technology, and let's get real about what it can do and what it can't do, and let's stop hyping it. I think we're going to need to design new AI tools and interfaces to support people. I think we're seeing that this technology, this latest wave of technology, is still limited in what it can do, and we still need humans in the loop. That means we need smart interfaces for people. We've got to be talking about the ergonomics of labor and the transition plans, and we need to really manage this strategically, but also humanely. And with that, I will close. Thank you so much.